The nation had just been rocked by the sound of gunfire. But Jasmine Crockett's words cut even deeper. In a moment when the country froze, waiting for reassurance, unity, and compassion, she delivered something else entirely, a remark so cold, so jarring, that millions watching could hardly believe what they were hearing. Picture the scene. The news of Charlie Kirk's assassination attempt had broken like thunder across every television, every phone screen, every radio. Shockwaves rattled, families gathered in living rooms, students scrolling between classes, workers on their lunch breaks. America was stunned, hearts pounding, breaths held, questions swirling. Was he alive? Would he survive? What did this mean for the political climate already tearing the nation at its seams? In moments like this, leaders are tested. History remembers what is said when the room goes quiet. It remembers who rose to the occasion with grace and who failed. But as the cameras turned toward Representative Jasmine Crockett, the words that left her lips felt like a betrayal. They weren't words of unity, sympathy, or even silence. They were words drenched in disdain, delivered with the kind of detachment that made grieving Americans feel as though their pain had been mocked. You could almost hear the collective gasp ripple across the country. Twitter feeds lit up. Phones buzzed with text messages. Did she really just say that? Clips spread within minutes, first on social media, then on every major network replaying them on loop. And with every replay, outrage mounted. It wasn't just what she said. It was the timing. At the very hour when families prayed for Kirk's life, when even political rivals held their breath in anxious silence, she chose contempt. And so, instead of America rallying around a shared sense of dignity, the wound was split wider. Instead of empathy, there was mockery. The moment instantly became more than an offhand comment. It was a defining line between decency and arrogance, between those who respected tragedy and those who exploited it. But that was only the beginning, because what she said next would ignite a firestorm across America. The shots that rang out against Charlie Kirk did more than shatter the air. They froze an entire country in place. For a moment, it felt as if time itself stopped. Whether you agreed with Kirk or despised his politics, what happened to him pierced through the usual noise of partisan debate. It was raw, human, and terrifying. The thought of political violence returning to America's main stage stirred memories the nation thought it had left behind. Suddenly everyone, left, right, and in between, was reminded of how fragile democracy truly is when disagreement turns into bloodshed. Hospitals were placed on high alert. Crowds outside the scene whispered prayers and clutched their phones, desperate for updates. Across kitchen tables and office cubicles, people whispered, "Is he going to make it?" Parents shielded their children from the news, while older generations recalled the assassinations of past decades. Kennedy, King, figures whose deaths ripped the soul of the nation in half. It was supposed to be a moment of solemnity, of reflection, of unity in the face of chaos. And in that stillness, leaders everywhere were expected to rise to the occasion. It didn't matter if they were Republicans or Democrats, activists or pundits. America needed words of calm, words of grace. Even rivals often find the humanity to acknowledge tragedy. Because in moments like this, political lines blur. What remains is our shared sense of mortality, our collective yearning for stability. But when Jasmine Crockett spoke, that fragile thread snapped. Instead of calm, there was callousness. Instead of empathy, there was mockery. Her words weren't just political, they felt like a slap to every American who believed tragedy should transcend partisanship. In the place of leadership, she left a vacuum filled with disdain. Viewers felt it immediately. The timing, the tone, the audacity. It was as if she had chosen cruelty when compassion was the only acceptable response. And as the clip spread, anger grew. Commentators struggled to contain their disbelief. Social media erupted with side-by-side comparisons of other leaders offering prayers and Crockett's smirk-laden remarks. The contrast was painful to watch. What should have been a unifying moment instead deepened the divides. It left millions asking, if our leaders can't show basic dignity in the face of violence, what does that say about the state of our democracy? It wasn't just about Charlie Kirk anymore. It was about the values Americans still hold dear: respect for life, even in disagreement, and compassion in the face of chaos. And if you thought it couldn't get worse, wait until you hear the full clip. This wasn't the first time Jasmine Crockett revealed her contempt. It was only the loudest. To understand why her remark after Charlie Kirk's assassination attempt struck such a raw nerve, you have to look at the pattern. Because for Crockett, cruelty was not an accident. It was a habit. Long before the gunfire echoed and the nation gasped in shock, she had built a reputation for swagger, for arrogance, for cutting others down in a way that left her base cheering, but her critics appalled. The cameras always seemed to find her at her sharpest moments, rolling her eyes on the House floor, snapping back at colleagues with rehearsed disdain, turning every disagreement into a spectacle. Her voice wasn't that of a leader seeking compromise. it was the voice of someone who relished division. Social media only amplified it. Her Twitter feed read less like the words of a stateswoman and more like the threat of a provocateur. Snide quips, sarcastic memes, deliberate jabs at anyone who dared to challenge her. It wasn't enough to disagree, she had to humiliate. It wasn't enough to debate, she had to degrade. And for her loyalists, that attitude was addictive. But for a nation already teetering on the edge of polarization, it was gasoline on an already raging fire. There were warning signs too. Moments when she laughed off tragedy, when she brushed aside questions about violence, as though they were inconveniences to her rhetoric. Reporters noted her tone when discussing protests that turned destructive. Critics pointed out her flippant remarks about political opponents facing threats. Time and again, she had the chance to show grace, but each time, she chose the smirk. And yet, America has a long tradition of leaders rising above the fray in moments of crisis. Think of Ronald Reagan, wounded by a bullet but choosing humor to calm a shaken nation. Think of Barack Obama, singing Amazing Grace at a funeral to heal a community shattered by hate. Even rivals, even those who despised each other politically, have found it within themselves to acknowledge the sanctity of life when tragedy strikes. That is the American way, to put aside arrogance, if only for a moment, and honor what binds us together. Crockett broke that covenant. Her comment after the Kirk shooting didn't just sound cruel, it sounded alien to the very spirit of the Republic. It was a reminder that, for her, politics wasn't about service but spectacle. Dignity was never the point, dominance was. And the people noticed. Clips of her past statements resurfaced within hours. A montage went viral, Crockett mocking colleagues, Crockett sneering at witnesses in hearings, Crockett reveling in conflict. The new comment was not an outlier, but the crown jewel in a long history of arrogance. Americans watching from their living rooms could finally connect the dots. This wasn't a slip of the tongue, it was a window into her character. That realization stung, because when someone shows you who they are in moments of crisis, you believe them. And Jasmine Crockett had shown the country, in no uncertain terms, that empathy was beneath her. She had taken the stage history reserved for grace and turned it into a theater of contempt. And so the nation asked itself, if a leader cannot respect tragedy, what can they respect? If mockery comes easier than mourning, what kind of legacy does that leave for the children watching, the citizens listening, the democracy depending on dignity to survive? The questions grew louder, the outrage deeper. What had started as a single shocking comment was now proof of something larger, something more dangerous. Crockett had revealed her character to the nation, and America was beginning to decide what to do about it. But while her backstory painted the villain clearly, another story was rising in the background, one of resilience, sacrifice, and a very different kind of leadership. Every story of a villain needs its counterbalance. A story of those who choose dignity when arrogance tries to dominate, who choose empathy when cruelty bares its teeth. In the wake of the attempt on Charlie Kirk's life, that story was written not by politicians seeking soundbites, but by the people who refused to let hatred have the final word. Charlie Kirk himself, whether you agreed with his politics or not, had become a symbol of dedication. He was more than a commentator. He was a son, a husband, a father, a mentor to countless young people who found in his voice a sense of belonging. Those who knew him closely described a man driven by purpose, not convenience. His work kept him on the road, in town halls, on campuses, in studios, sparking conversations many feared to have. For his supporters, his presence was proof that conviction still mattered in a world obsessed with compromise. When the bullet tore through that conviction, it wasn't only his family that held its breath. Across the country, supporters and strangers alike found themselves united in prayer, in silence, in the trembling recognition that a line had been crossed. In communities from Arizona to Florida, vigils were held. Candles flickered against the night sky. Young people stood shoulder to shoulder, tears streaking their cheeks, holding signs not of political slogans but of simple human hope. Stay strong, Charlie. We are with you. The pain was palpable. Here were people who had given their time, their energy, sometimes their reputations, to stand by a man they believed in. Students who had lost friends to political polarization still showed up at rallies. Parents who feared for their children's future still tuned in every night. Veterans, teachers, small business owners. They formed the backbone of a movement that believed America was worth fighting for, not with fists or bullets, but with words and ideas. And in that moment of crisis, their sacrifice became visible. Every donation made to keep his message alive, every hour volunteered to organize an event, every time they faced ridicule for supporting him, it all crystallized into something deeper: loyalty. The kind of loyalty that isn't shaken by violence, the kind that turns pain into resolve. Even those who disagreed with Kirk could not deny the humanity of the moment. Political rivals sent messages of support. Community leaders prayed openly for his recovery. Journalists who had sparred with him on air paused to reflect on the fragility of life and the sanctity of human dignity. America was reminded, if only briefly, that beyond the battlefield of ideas lies a deeper truth. We are human first. And yet, into this fragile unity, Jasmine Crockett's words fell like poison. For those who had spent years standing by Kirk, her mockery was unbearable. For his family, it was salt in a wound still bleeding. For his supporters, it was a betrayal of the very values America claims to hold sacred. When tragedy strikes, you rally around the human being at the center of it, not because you share their politics, but because you share their humanity. That's why the remark cut so deeply. It wasn't just about Charlie Kirk, the political figure. It was about every mother who watched her child walk out the door and prayed they'd come home safe. It was about every immigrant family who came to this country believing democracy meant disagreement without violence. It was about every young person who had been told that courage in the face of hatred still mattered. Crockett's words weren't just cruel, they felt like an insult to the very idea of decency itself. And in that insult, America saw the stark contrast more clearly than ever. On one side, a man lying in a hospital bed, his family holding his hand, his supporters gathering in candlelit crowds, praying, hoping, aching for him to pull through. On the other, a lawmaker with a microphone, smirking at their pain, mocking their loyalty, dismissing their sacrifice. It was that contrast, dignity versus disdain, empathy versus arrogance, that transformed the story into something bigger than politics. This was no longer about partisanship or policy. It was about the kind of America people wanted to live in, the kind of America they wanted to leave behind for their children. And that's exactly why Crockett's remark felt like a dagger in the heart of millions. It wasn't just what she said. It was the reminder that cruelty is always waiting for a microphone, that arrogance is always eager for an audience. But so too is dignity waiting to rise, to answer arrogance not with equal spite, but with the quiet, unshakable strength of truth. The question now was whether that strength would be enough, whether the people who chose dignity could stand tall against the voices that mocked it. And soon, the battle would no longer be silent prayers or quiet vigils. It would explode into open confrontation, where the line between arrogance and empathy would be drawn for all to see. The chamber fell silent, everyone waiting for her next word. But she smirked. It was the kind of smirk that said she hadn't miscalculated, that she wasn't embarrassed by the backlash. She wore it like armor. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Jasmine Crockett relished the outrage, as if every tweet, every furious headline, every clip replayed on national news was fuel for her fire. When reporters pressed her for clarification, she doubled down. No apology, no hesitation. Just sharper words delivered with even greater venom. Crockett insisted she had every right to speak her truth. She brushed off critics as overreacting, as if mocking a man's near-death experience was simply another political jab in a never-ending game. Each time she spoke, the tone was colder, more detached, almost gleeful at the discomfort she was causing. To her supporters online, this was strength. To the wider nation, it was cruelty on display. The reactions came fast. Clips of her initial comment and her defiant follow-up dominated social media. On cable news, pundits debated her fitness to serve. Some hosts, visibly shaken, replayed her words over slow, motion footage of Kirk being rushed into an ambulance. Viewers at home felt the contrast as a punch to the gut, the fragility of life against the arrogance of a politician's sneer. In Congress, murmurs spread across the aisles. Even colleagues who had once defended her were uneasy. There are unwritten rules in American politics, and one of them is simple: when blood is spilled, even metaphorically, you step back. You don't mock. You don't laugh. You don't diminish the pain of others. Yet here she was defying that rule in broad daylight. And as her voice grew louder, something else happened. The people began to rise. They didn't shout. They didn't smear. They demanded accountability. Calls flooded congressional offices. Emails poured in. Petitions circulated online. Town halls turned tense as constituents asked one burning question. How can she represent us if she cannot respect the sanctity of life? On talk shows and live streams, the contrast was stark. Crockett's face, dismissive, unrepentant, split screened against ordinary Americans, tearfully describing how her words made them feel invisible. Veterans who had fought for freedom, immigrants who had come seeking dignity, students who still believed in democracy. They all spoke with one voice. This was a line too far. The more Crockett pushed back, the more composed her opposition became. Dignified voices stood in the gap, refusing to mirror her contempt. They didn't scream or mock, they invoked values, compassion, respect, unity. It was restraint that made their outrage all the more powerful. Where she fumed, they stood calm. Where she jeered, they prayed. And in that contrast, the moral battle lines were drawn for the nation to see. Every interview, every headline, every viral clip raised the stakes. Crockett seemed determined to prove she could outlast the outrage. But the backlash was no longer just about a comment. It was about character. And with each passing day, more Americans began asking themselves if this was the kind of leadership their democracy could survive. The smirk had started as a symbol of her defiance. But under the harsh lights of public scrutiny, it began to look less like strength and more like the mask of someone cornered. And that corner was about to collapse, because soon the confrontation would reach its peak, and Crockett would face a counterattack so devastating that it left the chamber gasping. For days, the outrage swelled like a storm gathering on the horizon. What began as shock quickly hardened into resolve. America wasn't content to scroll past Crockett's remarks anymore. It was time to answer them. And this time, the response wouldn't come in whispers or muttered complaints. It would come in a thunderclap. The backlash began online. Hashtags spread like wildfire for dignity matters, Freikeker out, po words have weight. Within hours, clips of Crockett's smirk were remixed with somber images of Charlie Kirk being loaded into an ambulance, set against music that turned mockery into menace. TikTok teens who normally stayed out of politics stitched her comments with their own teary reactions. Mothers in kitchen aprons recorded videos explaining how her words felt like a knife to families already living with fear. Veterans posted selfies in uniform, shaking their heads in disbelief, saying, "We didn't serve for this." Cable news seized on the phenomenon. One network aired a town hall-style special where ordinary citizens confronted Crockett's words head-on. In the studio, a young college student rose to her feet, voice trembling but firm. "When someone is shot, we don't laugh. We don't mock. We stand together. If you can't even do that, how can you call yourself a leader?" The audience erupted in applause so loud it drowned out the cameras. Commentators from across the political spectrum, even those who normally sparred with Kirk, found themselves aligned. A progressive radio host admitted, "This isn't about left or right. It's about respect." And Crockett crossed a line we can't afford to ignore. Conservative pundits, usually quick to escalate, instead chose the language of empathy. They replayed her words next to speeches from past presidents calling for unity in times of violence. The contrast was devastating. In Congress, the murmur of disapproval had turned into a chorus. Colleagues whispered about censures, about stripping her of committee assignments, even about formal expulsion. One veteran lawmaker took the floor, voice heavy with emotion. "We can disagree all day long, but when bullets fly, we stand together. If we lose that, we lose America itself." The chamber rose in applause. Cameras cut to Crockett's face. The same smirk, but this time faltering. The turning point came not in a studio, not on a social feed, but in a packed hearing room. The atmosphere was electric, tension humming like a wire about to snap. Spectators leaned forward, reporters scribbled furiously, and Crockett sat at the witness table, daring anyone to confront her. Then it happened. A colleague, calm, collected, unflinching, addressed her directly. They didn't shout, they didn't sneer. They simply laid out the truth. "Representative Crockett, words matter. They have power. They can heal or they can harm. In a moment when this nation cried out for unity, you chose cruelty. You chose to mock a man fighting for his life. And in doing so, you mocked every American who still believes dignity has a place in our democracy." The room fell silent. The words hung heavy, unshakable. Crockett opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the colleague continued, their voice growing steadier. "This country has survived bullets before. We've buried leaders, mourned fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters. But we have never celebrated their pain. That is not who we are. That is not who we will ever be. And if you cannot understand that, then you do not deserve the honor of serving here." It was a mic drop without theatrics, a moral hammer that landed with the weight of history itself. The audience gasped, some applauded, others simply sat frozen, knowing they had just witnessed something irreversible. And with one simple line, the room erupted. Crockett had nowhere left to hide. The camera zoomed in. Her smirk cracked. The composure she had worn like armor splintered under the force of truth spoken plainly. For the first time, her eyes darted downward, avoiding the gaze of her colleagues, the press, the nation. In that instant, it was clear the arrogance that had carried her was collapsing in real time. Outside the chamber, the ripple effect exploded. That clip, that precise, devastating takedown, hit the internet like lightning. Within minutes it was trending on every platform. Millions watched, rewatched, shared with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like," and "Justice delivered in one sentence." Memes flooded timelines. Reaction videos captured audiences cheering, crying, nodding silently as they watched dignity triumph over disdain. At rallies across the country, supporters replayed the clip on giant screens. Crowds roared, waving flags and chanting slogans of unity. Churches showed it during Sunday services, framing it as a lesson in truth and compassion. College students passed it around in dorms, debating not policy, but principle. Families gathered around living room TVs to watch it again, finding comfort in the simple fact that arrogance had been met and defeated by dignity. For Crockett, the unraveling was complete. Every attempt she made to spin her remarks sounded hollow. Every interview she gave felt like damage control rather than leadership. The more she spoke, the more Americans remembered that one mic drop moment, the one that stripped away all pretense and laid bare the moral bankruptcy behind her smirk. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what America had chosen to validate. And in choosing to stand with dignity, the people sent a message that echoed far beyond one chamber, one headline, one controversy. The tide had turned. The storm that had gathered now broke, washing away Crockett's defiance and leaving her isolated, cornered, exposed. But if the counterattack had struck her down, the aftershocks were still to come. Because once a nation awakens to arrogance, it doesn't stop at outrage. It demands change. And the calls for her removal were only getting louder. The clip of the mic drop counterattack didn't just settle into America's bloodstream. It detonated. Within hours, it was the lead story on every major news outlet, pushed to the top of every trending list, and replayed endlessly on social media timelines. People didn't just watch it, they memorized it, quoted it, lived it. What had begun as outrage over Crockett's cruelty was now a movement demanding accountability. Everywhere the shockwaves rippled. In Congress, the fallout was immediate. Lawmakers who had once quietly tolerated Crockett's firebrand style now distanced themselves. No one wanted to stand beside her on camera. Some of her closest allies released carefully worded statements about the importance of respecting all human life, stopping just short of naming her, but leaving no doubt whom they meant. The House floor buzzed with talk of formal censure. Committees whispered about expulsion. The leadership, sensing the public tide, realized silence was no longer an option. The pressure wasn't just political. It was deeply human. Survivors of violence, families who had lost loved ones to shootings, veterans scarred by combat, parents of children taken too soon, stepped forward with open letters, demanding Crockett apologize or resign. Their words carried a moral gravity no spin could erase. We know what it is to suffer. We know what it is to grieve, and we will not allow our pain to be mocked. On the streets, demonstrations formed. Crowds gathered with signs reading, "Dignity first," and "Kick her out." These weren't partisan mobs, they were coalitions of Americans from every walk of life. Suburban parents stood beside college activists. Retired service members marched shoulder to shoulder with young entrepreneurs. They weren't chanting about policy or party. They were demanding decency. The media fanned the flames. Morning shows replayed the hearing with somber narration, contrasting Crockett's smug grin against the thunderous applause that followed the counterattack. Evening news panels debated whether she could survive the backlash. Late night hosts mocked her arrogance, their jokes drawing laughs but also underscoring the seriousness of her fall. Everywhere, one question lingered: how long could she hold out? Meanwhile, online, the digital storm became a tsunami. Millions posted the clip with captions like, "This is America at its best," or "Justice delivered live." The hashtags calling for her removal soared to the top of Twitter's global charts. Even apolitical influencers joined the chorus, saying they couldn't stay silent about a leader mocking a man's brush with death. Crockett tried to fight back. She went on friendly podcasts, framed herself as a victim of manufactured outrage, and doubled down with claims that her words were taken out of context. But every attempt backfired. The internet flooded her interviews with angry comments. Clips of her, clarifications, were dissected frame by frame, exposing every contradiction. The harder she pushed, the more the public dug in. Her confidence, once a weapon, now looked like desperation. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. Donors pulled funding. Local leaders hinted she had become a liability. Whispers of primary challengers spread across her district. Staffers, caught in the whirlwind, began quietly updating their resumes. The once untouchable Crockett was now radioactive. And yet, the most powerful shift wasn't political. It was cultural. For a long time, many Americans had grown cynical, convinced that arrogance always triumphed and cruelty was just part of the game. But this moment, this raw, unfiltered clash of dignity versus disdain, shattered that cynicism. People saw that truth, spoken calmly and courageously, still had the power to cut through noise. That decency wasn't weakness. That unity wasn't outdated. Families replayed the clip at dinner tables as a lesson for their children. Teachers referenced it in civics classes. Churches quoted it in sermons. The mic drop counterattack wasn't just an event. It became a touchstone, a cultural reset reminding America what it wanted to be. For Crockett, the walls closed in. The chamber where she had once strutted with smug certainty now felt hostile, every glance a judgment, every silence a condemnation. Her words had once commanded attention, now they triggered sighs and eye rolls. The woman who had mocked another's pain was now the face of her own political downfall. And so the shockwaves rolled on, gathering momentum, pointing to the inevitable. America wasn't just angry. It wasn't just offended. It was united in a rare, unmistakable demand: she had to go. The smirk that had once defined her now symbolized her undoing, and the echo of that one simple line, the mic drop truth that exposed her, refused to fade. Because this wasn't just the end of a debate. It was the beginning of a reckoning. When the dust finally settled, America was left not just with the memory of one woman's cruelty, but with the echo of something larger. A choice about who we are and who we want to be. Crockett's smirk may have sparked the outrage, but the nation's response became the real story. It was a reminder that dignity still carries weight, that empathy is not weakness, and that even in fractured times, unity is possible. The lesson was simple, but profound. In a moment when bullets had already shaken the country, words could have healed. Words could have comforted. They could have reminded Americans that, no matter their disagreements, some lines of decency were never to be crossed. Instead, Crockett chose mockery. And that choice revealed the stark difference between arrogance and compassion. But the backlash proved something even greater. Arrogance doesn't win forever. For every smirk, there are millions of Americans who believe in empathy. For every cruel jab, there are countless families who know what it means to hurt, to lose, to stand by each other in dark times. And when those voices rise together, they can still drown out the cynicism that too often poisons our politics. Charlie Kirk himself became a symbol of that resilience. Not because he was perfect, not because everyone agreed with him, but because he represented something bigger than any one man, the human right to be treated with dignity, even in tragedy. His fight for life, his supporters' prayers, and the outpouring of solidarity that followed became a testament to the truth that binds us as a people. We are not defined by our divisions, but by the compassion we extend when it matters most. The moral lesson echoes far beyond politics. It touches every classroom, every household, every neighborhood where children are watching, learning what it means to stand tall. They will remember that cruelty, no matter how loud, was silenced by dignity spoken with quiet force. They will remember that America chose to value truth over arrogance, empathy over mockery, and that choice will shape the future they inherit. So, in the end, Crockett's downfall wasn't just about one moment, one chamber, or one politician. It was about America remembering itself, the best version of itself. A nation that doesn't cheer for pain. A nation that doesn't laugh at tragedy. A nation that, when tested, still finds the strength to say, we choose decency. And maybe that's the lasting gift of the storm. Not the outrage, not the headlines, but the reminder that when we stand together in truth, no smirk, no mockery, no arrogance can withstand us, because dignity will always outshine cruelty. Empathy will always outlast arrogance. And unity, fragile as it may seem, will always be stronger than mockery. That is the America worth fighting for. And that is the America we saw rise from the fire. And so, we return to the moment that started it all. Jasmine Crockett's sick comment in the wake of an assassination attempt. What she thought would be a throwaway jab became the very spark that unraveled her credibility. Because in the end, America didn't rally around her cruelty. It rallied around decency. Around dignity. Around the timeless belief that no matter how divided we are, mocking tragedy will never define who we are. Her words cut deep, yes. But the response cut deeper. It reminded every politician, every commentator, every American watching that words matter. They carry weight, especially in our darkest hours. And when leaders choose arrogance over empathy, the people still have the power to hold them accountable. That's the story here. Not just Crockett's downfall, but America's choice. A choice to reject mockery and embrace truth. To turn outrage into unity. To prove that even in the heat of conflict, dignity still stands taller than arrogance. And if you believe in that lesson, if you believe in the power of truth spoken with courage, then this is your moment to join the movement. Subscribe if you believe dignity will always outshine arrogance. Share this video so the world knows America still values empathy, even when leaders forget it. And tell us in the comments, do you think Jasmine Crockett should be removed from office? Your voice matters, because this story isn't finished. It lives on in what we choose to do next. Because history isn't written by the smirks of the arrogant. It's written by the strength of those who refuse to let cruelty win.